A lake in Wyoming glows blue because it sits inside a crater that is not finished with us. A volcano in New Mexico isn't a mountain. It's a 50-mile scar the ground never healed over. And somewhere in California, a USGS field geologist marked a spot on a map as inactive and then quietly requested a transfer. You won't believe number 34. Fact 1. This volcano doesn't look like a volcano. It looks like a parking lot. It's in Oregon, Newberry Volcano, and the most recent lava flow on its surface is so young, obsidian shards still have glass-sharp edges that slice through boot leather. The eruption happened while the Aztec Empire was still a going concern. Hikers walk it barefoot in summer. There is no local warning infrastructure. Zero. Fact 2. 40,000 people drive past this volcano every single morning. They think it's a hill. Cerro Negro's American cousin lives in New Mexico, the Taos Plateau Volcanic Field, a monogenetic field meaning it doesn't erupt from one predictable throat. It opens new vents wherever pressure finds a crack. The last vent opened during the Spanish colonial period. No one mapped where the next one forms. There is no next one mapped. That's the point. Fact 3. This volcano has erupted exactly once, and that's why it's the most dangerous one on this list. Cerro Colorado, America's youngest volcano, active roughly 4,000 years ago, sitting directly above a major river drainage and a highway corridor. One eruption, no follow-up. Volcanologists call this repose, not dormant. Repose ends. Interstate 70 runs through the blast radius. Fact 4. USGS maps label this as a field. Local Ute oral tradition calls it the place that breathes at night. The Jemez Mountains in New Mexico sit above the Valles Caldera, a supervolcano that last fully erupted 1.25 million years ago but has had hydrothermal unrest within recorded memory. Radon readings near the caldera rim spike seasonally. Visitors camp inside it. The visitor center has no seismograph display. Fact 5. This one erupts every 300 years. The math stopped working in our favor 12 years ago. The Coso Volcanic Field in California, an active geothermal zone with documented ground uplift and helium-3 outgassing so elevated that researchers initially suspected a measurement error. The field powers a geothermal plant. The plant sits on the inflation zone. The operators know. They have not disclosed this publicly in their liability filings. Fact 6. Hawaii's most dangerous volcano doesn't look like a mountain. It's a crack in the ocean floor. Loihi Seamount rises from the seafloor 22 miles off the Big Island's southern coast and is actively building the next Hawaiian island. In 1996, it collapsed into itself in a swarm of 4,000 earthquakes in 48 hours. The resulting pit, Pele's Pit, is still venting actively. No evacuation plan exists because no one lives there, yet. Fact 7. Smaller than Central Park. Contains enough sulfur dioxide to acidify a watershed for a decade. Lassen Peak, California, the southernmost active volcano in the Cascades, last erupted between 1914 and 1917 in a series of blasts that deposited ash on Reno, Nevada. What's rarely discussed, the eruptions weren't explosive at first. They began as steam vents that locals photographed for postcards. Then came the pyroclastic flows. The postcards stopped. Fact 8. This volcano is monitored by a single seismometer. 1. Medicine Lake Volcano, California. The largest volcano by volume in the entire Cascade Range, holding more magma by mass than Mount Shasta. It sits in a remote corner of Modoc County, with infrastructure so thin that the nearest hospital is 90 minutes away. If its caldera activates, evacuation routes converge on 2 roads. Both cross the lava field. Fact 9. This volcano's last eruption ended while Abraham Lincoln was still alive. The magma hasn't moved since, but the ground has. Mount Hood, Oregon. Last major eruptive phase ended around 1781, just before the Lewis and Clark expedition passed below it. Modern GPS monitoring shows the summit is slowly, measurably inflating. The inflation has no current explanation that satisfies the entire monitoring team. Mount Hood's ski resorts drew 1.3 million visitors last year. Fact 10. The state of Washington built its most critical north-south highway directly through a lahar corridor. Mount Rainier generates the highest lahar risk of any volcano in North America, not from an eruption, but from its own weight. The summit glacier sits atop a hydrothermally weakened core, and a magnitude 5.0 earthquake, well within regional norms, could trigger a collapse, sending 100-mile-per-hour debris flows down 5 river valleys simultaneously. Interstate 5 sits at the end of one.
Fact 11. This volcano's magma chamber is so shallow, the trees above it are dying from below. Yellowstone Caldera, Wyoming. But not the headline. The headline is Norris Geyser Basin, where soil temperature has risen measurably since 2003, killing established conifer stands in patterns that match subsurface thermal plume migration. The trees are the canary. The canary is dead. Tourism to that exact zone is up 40%. Fact 12. Alaska has more active volcanoes than all other U.S. states combined. The most dangerous one isn't the one with a name you'd recognize. Mount Cleveland in the Aleutian Islands has no seismic monitoring network on the island itself. Everything USGS knows about its activity comes from satellite thermal imaging, which has a 12-hour data lag. Cleveland erupted 19 times since 2001. Every trans-Pacific flight from Seattle to Asia passes within 100 miles of its ash column altitude. Air traffic rerouting costs run into the millions per event. Fact 13. This isn't a volcano. It's a caldera the size of Rhode Island that most Americans drive across without knowing it. Long Valley Caldera, California, 20 miles wide, 11 miles across, formed 760,000 years ago in an eruption 2,000 times larger than Mount St. Helens. Highway 395 bisects it. Mammoth Mountain Ski Resort sits on its rim. In 1982, a swarm of 7,000 earthquakes prompted USDA to issue a notice of potential volcanic hazard. The ski resort stayed open. The notice was quietly allowed to expire. Fact 14. 3 words. Mud flows 100 miles per hour. Puyallup River Valley, Washington. Downstream from Rainier, populated by 150,000 people in the Lahar inundation zone, who received no door-to-door notification when the hazard assessment was updated in 2015.
Fact 15. This volcanic cyst so large, geologists spent 30 years arguing about whether it qualified as a single feature. The Snake River Plain, Idaho, a 400-mile-long track of calderas left by the Yellowstone hotspot as the North American plate drifted over it. The hotspot didn't move. The continent did. Idaho is the scar. The current hotspot position is under Wyoming. The next position, in geologic time, is under Montana. Billings has about 2 million years to plan.
Fact 16. A volcano in Nevada is so quietly lethal, it doesn't appear in most state hazard planning documents. Lunar Crater Volcanic Field, Nevada, a 100-square-mile monogenetic field in the Basin and Range, with the most recent eruption roughly 38,000 years ago. Monitoring, none. Distance to Las Vegas, 170 miles. Direction of prevailing winds, toward Las Vegas. In a worst-case eruption scenario, McCarran International Airport closes within hours from ash infiltration into jet turbines.
Fact 17. Washington State's second most dangerous volcano is not a household name. It erupts on a different clock entirely. Glacier Peak, Washington, the most remote of the Cascade volcanoes, sitting in the wilderness with no road access to its base. Its last major eruption, roughly 13,000 years ago, deposited ash as far east as Wyoming. Modern lahar models show the Sauk River Valley, including the town of Darrington, would receive debris flows within 40 minutes of eruption onset. Darrington's siren warning system, not yet installed.
Fact 18. This volcano is in Arizona. Most people don't know Arizona has a volcano.
The San Francisco Volcanic Field near Flagstaff contains over 600 individual vents, including Sunset Crater, which last erupted around 1085 CE and caused an archaeological diaspora, dispersing indigenous settlements across the Colorado Plateau. The field is monogenetic. The next eruption will not come from Sunset Crater. It will come from a new vent, in a location that is, right now, just a piece of flat ground.
Fact 19. Utah's volcanic threat sits beneath a national park. The gift shop is directly above the magma pathway. Bryce Canyon sits adjacent to the Markagunt Plateau volcanic field, Utah's most recently active volcanic zone, with eruptions as recent as 1,000 years ago. The plateau shows ongoing microseismic activity that does not yet meet federal thresholds for hazard reclassification. Park visitation, 2.6 million annually.
Evacuation routing from the rim: one road, two lanes, no shoulder.
Fact 20. The largest magma body on this entire list is not Yellowstone. It's something most Americans have never heard of, and it's inflating. Yellowstone gets the headlines, but the Cascades volcanic arc sits above a subduction zone, the Juan de Fuca Plate diving beneath North America, feeding a continuous magma supply chain that connects Mount Baker in Washington to Lassen Peak in California. The total magma volume stored across this arc is orders of magnitude greater than Yellowstone's isolated hotspot chamber. It isn't one volcano, it's a system, and the system is not static. Ground deformation data from Mount St. Helens shows renewed uplift since 2016, 1 to 2 inches per year, accelerating. The 1980 eruption was not the end of that story. It was chapter 1. Fact 21. This volcano has a hotline. No one is staffing it on weekends. Mount Shasta, California, one of the most potentially dangerous volcanoes on the West Coast, capable of producing debris avalanches that would reach Interstate 5 in Redding within hours. USGS monitors it, but monitoring bandwidth is split across the entire Cascades chain, and Shasta's alert level has been normal for so long the designation has stopped meaning anything operationally. Fact 22. Still here? Good, because Fact 22 is currently happening under your feet in the Pacific Northwest. The Cascadia subduction zone doesn't just produce earthquakes, it primes the volcanic arc above it. Every locked stress cycle on the subduction fault transfers pressure upward into the volcanic plumbing. When Cascadia unlocks, and the geological record suggests it does, every 200 to 500 years, the shaking doesn't just flatten buildings, it destabilizes volcanic edifices already weakened by hydrothermal alteration. The last full Cascadia rupture was January 26, 1700. The math is not comfortable. Fact 23. This volcano in Montana produces more helium-3 than any comparable surface feature in the contiguous U.S. Helium-3 comes from the mantle. The mantle is not supposed to be that close. The Bear Paw Mountains volcanic field, a deeply eroded Eocene volcanic complex in northern Montana, technically ancient, but with helium isotope ratios in local spring water that suggest the mantle source is still thermally active at depth. No formal monitoring, no hazard designation. The nearest seismograph is 180 miles away in Billings. Fact 24. This volcano sits beneath a reservoir. The reservoir supplies drinking water to 2 million people. Medicine Lake Volcano, California. Shasta Lake sits downstream in its drainage basin. A flank collapse. Not even a full eruption. Just structural failure from quake-triggered slope instability would inject volcanic debris into the watershed above the water intake. No alternative source. Trucking water for 2 million people for the weeks or months required for remediation has never been modeled in any public FEMA contingency document. Fact 25. The insurance industry knows something about this volcano that the public hasn't been told explicitly. Insurers model volcanic risk for portfolio exposure, and their internal actuarial exclusions tell a story. Volcano coverage exclusions in Pacific Northwest homeowner policies have quietly expanded in the last decade to encompass a 150-mile radius around Mount Rainier, coverage that used to exist, then didn't. When an insurer quietly stops writing coverage, it is not announcing a change in public safety communication. It is announcing a change in its own probability estimate. Fact 26. This volcano is in the eastern United States. No one has an evacuation plan because no one thinks they need one. The Raton-Clayton volcanic field straddles New Mexico and Colorado along the Oklahoma border, the easternmost significant volcanic field in the U.S. outside of the East Coast's ancient Appalachian remnants. The most recent eruption was 33,000 years ago, well within the behavioral window for recurrence. There are no monitoring instruments on site. The nearest USGS volcano observatory is 800 miles away in California. Fact 27. This one was called dormant by federal assessors. Then it started venting. The assessment hasn't been updated. Mount Baker, Washington. Currently the hottest fumarolic area of any volcano in the Cascades, measured by thermal output per unit area. In 1975, its thermal output increased tenfold in a matter of months, prompting emergency evacuation plans for 10,000 downstream residents.
Then it calmed down. The evacuation plans were never formalized. The thermal output today remains significantly elevated above pre-1975 baseline. The plans are still informal.
Fact 28. A town of 10,000 people sits inside the blast radius. They voted down a proposed relocation study twice. Orting, Washington, population 9,000 plus, situated on ancient lahar deposits from Mount Rainier, in the direct path of modeled debris flows from a Rainier flank collapse. Studies show residents have approximately 30 minutes from eruption to lahar arrival. The single exit road has a modeled evacuation clearance time of 90 minutes under normal traffic. The town has a working waterfront, and property values are rising. Fact 29. This volcano produces no seismic signal before eruption. None. It just opens. Monogenetic fields, like those in New Mexico, Arizona, Idaho, and Nevada, don't produce the prolonged earthquake swarms that give weeks of warning before stratovolcano eruptions. When a new vent opens in a monogenetic field, the seismic precursor window is measured in hours, sometimes less. USGS acknowledges this. The public communication plan for a sudden vent opening in a populated monogenetic field, like the one beneath the Albuquerque Metro, is listed in internal documents as under development. Fact 30. This volcano is showing unrest right now. As you watch this video, the reading is live. Kilauea, Hawaii, but not in the way the Tourism Bureau describes it. Since the 2018 Lower East Rift Zone eruption that destroyed over 700 homes and drained the summit caldera, the volcano has been recharging. The summit refilling rate, measured by tilt meters and GPS, has exceeded the recharge rate observed before every major eruptive episode in the modern instrumental record. Magma storage pressure at the summit is currently at or above the threshold that preceded the 2018 event. USGS Hawaii Volcano Observatory is tracking this in real time. The current alert level is advisory. In 2018, it was advisory the week before 700 homes burned. Fact 31. FEMA's Volcanic Mass Casualty Response Plan assumes roads will be passable. They won't be. The Cascades eruption scenario modeled by USGS for emergency planning assumes lahar flows confined to primary drainages. But the 1980 Mount St. Helens eruption, the most documented volcanic event in U.S. history, produced lahars that traveled routes not predicted in advance modeling. Secondary channels activated. Bridges that weren't in the hazard zone failed. In a larger eruption scenario from Rainier, the I-5 corridor, the only contiguous ground route up the west coast, has a non-trivial probability of being severed at multiple points simultaneously. Fact 32. The ash from a Cascades eruption wouldn't just shut down airports, it would shut down agriculture across 3 states for a growing season. The Columbia Basin, Washington and Oregon's wheat and hop production heartland, a multi-billion-dollar agricultural zone, sits directly in the prevailing downwind ash trajectory from Mount Rainier, Mount Adams, and Mount St. Helens. Volcanic ash is not fertilizer. It seals soil, blocks photosynthesis, and acidifies drainage water. A moderate eruption during spring planting would compromise a full year of production. There is no federal crop insurance product that covers volcanic ash damage at that scale. Fact 33. A nuclear facility sits inside a volcanic hazard zone. It has a current operating license. The Columbia Generating Station, Washington State's only nuclear power plant, sits on the Columbia River in the Hanford area, within the ash fallout zone of multiple Cascade volcanoes. Its cooling water intake is in a river that lahar models show could receive volcanic debris in a large eruption. The NRC's site hazard analysis for volcanic ash was last comprehensively updated before the most recent USGS lahar inundation mapping revision. The gap between those two documents has not been publicly reconciled. Fact 34. The safest volcano on this list is also the most likely to kill the most people. That is not a contradiction. Mount Rainier's threat is not from a massive explosive eruption, though that remains possible. It's from a cold lahar, a collapse of its glacier-capped, hydrothermally weakened summit that generates an enormous debris flow without any eruptive activity at all. This requires no magmatic unrest, no earthquake swarm, no precursor that would trigger a warning.
It requires only gravity and a structural failure that the mountain's internal condition makes increasingly probable.
A cold lahar from Rainier could kill more people than any historical U.S. volcanic eruption, with 0 minutes of official warning time.
Fact 35. This town knows. They know everything, and they're not leaving. Ording, Sumner, Puyallup, Auburn communities of the Puyallup River Valley below Rainier. Community meetings about volcanic risk are well attended. Residents understand the lahar modeling. Real estate disclosures in Washington state now include volcanic hazard zone status. And yet, home prices in Orting have risen 60% in 5 years. People are moving in. The knowledge and the decision to stay exist simultaneously, without contradiction, because the risk is abstract and the community is real. Fact 36. Warning systems are not scientific problems. They are political ones. And the politics have already failed once. The Volcano Notification Service, USGS's public alert system, requires residents to opt in.
It does not push alerts.
It does not interface with wireless emergency alerts the way tornado warnings do. In 2020, funding for a dedicated Cascades monitoring enhancement was approved, then delayed, then partially reallocated. The monitoring gap that existed before 1980 on Mount St. Helens, when the eruption surprised a world that thought it had time, has not been fully closed for the other Cascade peaks. The instruments are better, the funding is not.
Fact 37. The economic collapse from a major Cascades eruption would begin before the lava stopped. The ash does the real damage. A USGS economic modeling exercise estimated that even a moderate eruption from Mount Rainier, not a catastrophic event, just a moderate one, would generate regional economic losses in the range of tens of billions within the first 30 days, primarily from supply chain disruption, agricultural loss, transportation network failure, and the cascading closure of businesses dependent on a functional Columbia Basin. That estimate did not include the cost of long-term resettlement of lahar zone communities. No one has published that number.
Fact 38.
The most dangerous thing about America's volcanoes is not the magma. It's the assumption that we'll have time. Every major volcanic disaster of the 20th century, Nevado del Ruiz in Colombia, Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines, the 1980 St. Helens eruption, involved a gap between scientific knowledge and public action. The scientists knew. The warnings were issued. The evacuation plans were insufficient, non-existent, ignored, or arrived too late.
The U.S. has better monitoring than Colombia did in 1985. It does not have better evacuation infrastructure than it did in 1980. The roads are the same roads. Fact 39. This is the volcano that most volcanologists, asked off the record at conferences, say worries them the most. It is not Yellowstone, Mount Rainier, not because its eruption probability is the highest on any given timescale, but because the population exposure is highest, the evacuation geometry is worst, the structural instability from hydrothermal alteration is most advanced, and the gap between what the science shows and what the public policy has implemented is widest. Multiple peer-reviewed papers have described it as the volcano with the greatest life safety risk in the United States. It is 54 miles from downtown Seattle. On a clear day, you can see it from the city's waterfront. It is beautiful.
That is part of the problem. Fact 40. The volcano that erupts in the next decade has already started telling us. We just haven't decided to listen yet. Mount St. Helens is recharging. Kilauea is pressurizing. Mount Baker is venting at anomalous rates. The Long Valley caldera showed a swarm of 8,000 earthquakes in 2021 that received 48 hours of news coverage and then was forgotten. The Aleutian chain produces multiple eruptions every year, most of them unobserved. The next major U.S. volcanic event is not a question of geology. It is a question of which system runs out of time first and whether anyone built a road pointing away from it. Based on current infrastructure, one of those things is more likely than the other. And somewhere right now, in a basement in Olympia, a tiltmeter needle has just moved a fraction of a degree in the wrong direction. In a kitchen in Orting, a family is having dinner. Through the window, Rainier is lit orange by the sunset. Someone calls it gorgeous. In a car on Route 410, a driver is in traffic on a road built across an ancient lahar deposit, listening to the radio, waiting for the light to change. Geography isn't history. It's the floor beneath your feet. And it's getting warm.